Over a year and a half ago, I made a video talking about why masturbation actually isn't natural and overall debunking the concept of masturbation so that you can easily move on from it. This video was one of my best videos on this channel by far, and so I want to make part 2 today. And I want to preface this by saying that me debunking masturbation means that I'm going to present a different perspective, a different opinion. It does not mean that other people do not have different opinions or different beliefs in regards to masturbation. My goal is to simply challenge this narrative that almost instills limiting beliefs into other people when it comes to quitting masturbation. And it makes people think, well, rationally, masturbating once in a while is okay. And I'm not there to force you to stop. I'm there to just completely change your perspective drastically when it comes to this issue. So we need to first start off with history. Throughout history, there were different myths and debates around if masturbation was healthy or not. If you do a quick search, you'll realize that there were numerous positions that said that masturbation was like a disease essentially. And I would argue that it was one of the mainstream view when it came to masturbation for a very long time, especially when in the Western world, people used to be much more conservative and religious. So doctors back then used to believe that masturbation would cause health problems and it meant that something was wrong with you. And I'm not here to advocate this position. I'm just here to say what people believe. I'm not endorsing one or the other here. But then the year 1960 came, and what happened after the Second World War was the sexual revolution. And Michel Foucault, a French writer, said in one of his books, and during the sexual revolution, as people right before that were trying to suppress the idea of talking about intimacy and being a bit more liberal in their approach when it comes to sexual ideas and so on. Well, what happened is with anything that those in powers try to suppress, well, the public will just react by kind of revolting against that. And so people would become more sexual in that sense. And there were other movements at that time, like the second wave of feminism, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the counterculture, like the hippie movement, and of course the sexual revolution was in this. So what happened in the 1960s was that there were two scientists. And of course, scientists, well, there's this authority bias with any experts where if someone is a scientist or is an expert in that field, well, you think because he is an expert, therefore what he says must be true. Because we don't want to just like start researching for ourselves and so on. We'd rather just rely on people that know about the subject. It's human nature. And so what happened was Masters and Johnson. And the research started to become somewhat famous in the media. And they kind of like started riding that wave that people like Alfred Kinsey in the 1940s and 50s started to publish reports on why people should essentially discover themselves through masturbation and why it was healthy and really challenging those cultural norms at that time. And obviously you have people like Freud, like back in the early 1900s, that started the conversation essentially. So it's important to understand that we believe masturbation to be normal, or to use masturbation as a tool for self-discovery, or masturbation to be healthy because of movements that we have adopted in order to sometimes just challenge the cultural norm, not because we actually do the research and really think that this is healthy or necessary. And we must use logic here and say, well, if we get educated that this thing is healthy, it's a way to discover yourself, it is pleasurable, it relieves your stress, and it gives you all of these beautiful things, and it is a replacement for sex, which is a huge one for a lot of people that can't access intimacy, even though research shows that people still masturbate whilst being in relationship where they partake in intimacy. So wouldn't you agree that to a certain extent, if you get fed these ideas throughout your teenage years, for example, right when you hit puberty, that it would make sense that a lot of people masturbate and therefore think that is normal or natural. Now we're going to look at a very interesting report on sexual behaviors like masturbation and beliefs in regards to masturbation that was done in 2018 by Tenga, which is a Japanese wellness brand that did a global report across many different countries to really see like how do people think about self-pleasure, how their culture is in regards to sexual behaviors. So it's like a large opinion survey that will really shock you when it comes to masturbation specifically. In the UK, it is 96% of men that masturbates, whilst in China it is 80% that masturbates. So already we see that not every single man on earth masturbates. It is still a very huge percentage, but with that number we see that only 61% do it more than weekly, okay? Which shows that it's not everyone that just masturbates compulsively like sometimes we think, because if we have a hard time stopping masturbation and we see everyone around us masturbating, we think, well, this must be the reality, but it's not always the case. I'm not saying that people don't masturbate. I'm not saying that the majority do not masturbate. I'm saying that it is possible to just not masturbate at all. And then when we look at women, what I find very interesting, if we compare these two countries again, because there's different countries, but we'll take the UK and China as the ones that we'll base our stats on, it is 78% of women, okay, for the UK. Sorry for my writing, by the way, but and in China, guess how much it is? It is 48% of women. So 48% of women, less than half of the women report masturbating. And here we'll talk about if they discovered masturbating, not if they are doing it frequently. It's not 96% that does it frequently. It's only 61%. So if someone masturbated and came across masturbation, which is, let's be honest, it's probably the case just because we get told about it and then we get curious and we're in the stage of life where we try to discover certain things and we just do it and so on. But what we find fascinating in this study is the belief, and that is that when we look at the UK, 49% believes that it is good to masturbate, that is healthy for them. And in China, we have around 24%. So we see here, if someone believes that masturbation is healthy, well, we can kind of like put 1 + 1 = 2, because we know that if I think that this is good for me, then I'll go and do it. And I'll give this example that we see within other industries. For example, within the food industry, there has been a movement where people have been saying that cholesterol is bad for you. And then there's also the counter movement, which is the carnivore movement. But the anti-cholesterol movement, let's call it like that, has been pretty much adopted by a lot of people, where they literally believe that eating red meats, eggs, and so on has a negative effect on one's health. But when we look at the science and understand what cholesterol is used for when it comes, for example, to your brain and testosterone, and see how important it is. And I'm not like a diet expert by any means, but we see across culture and across history. If you read, for example, about different tribes, not to say that tribes know the objective truth when it comes to diet, but you see the state of their health before they've been modernized, obviously, and you see that they would often put a lot of emphasis on these exact foods that contain a lot of cholesterol. The most popular one is liver. Liver is known for cholesterol, and brain also, both are known to have a ton of cholesterol. And yet nowadays we say, oh yeah, we're unhealthy, it's because we just eat too much meat, we eat too much eggs, and that causes us to get sick and have these diseases and so on. In that case, we can just make the simple conclusion that people are blaming something that has no connection whatsoever. We can simply make the argument that people blame something when in reality it's because of something else. Maybe they've been living an unhealthy lifestyle where they barely even exercise and do any physical activities, and they don't sleep properly, and they eat junk food almost every day. And then when you blame eating eggs from the farm and eating meat, which your body literally requires because of how nutrient dense these foods are, we realize that we're just blaming the wrong thing. And so my point I'm trying to make, and the connection with masturbation here, is that sometimes we believe things not because they are true, just because we've been told about it, and this is the only perspective that we get around that. And so we need to really see the other side of the coin to realize, oh, maybe I don't need to masturbate. Why do I need to believe in the idea that masturbation is just natural and good for me and it relieves my stress, and that it's something I need to do to clean up the pipes once in a while? Do I really need to keep masturbation in my life? And you start challenging that and realizing that it's not because everyone does it that you need to do it as well. We need to realize something very important. In life, what you expect oftentimes determine the outcome rather than the rule. So let's say, for example, you drink water and you get told, oh, I didn't tell you, but the water, actually today they said that there was something wrong with the water and you'll probably catch something bad if you drink the water. Most oftentimes, not for everyone, but for some people, they'll start worrying about that to the point where they literally make their own self sick. This is what we call a simple placebo, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that determines the outcome, their expectation that they're going to get sick, not that they actually get sick themselves. one of my mentors always told me the story of a guy that was delivering food, and he had like this freezer in the back of the truck. And one time he went in the freezer, which was like a big freezer, and the doors literally locked and he couldn't get out. And he started banging on the door, he started panicking and so on. He wanted to just do something about this so that he could literally survive. And then after some time, he literally died. And they found his body there, dead. And what he realized is that the temperature of the freezer, it was not even cold. But because the guy expected the freezer to be cold, well, guess what happened? So we need to really be careful of when we say like masturbation is healthy. Sure, you can do something and then feel like it is healthy, feel like it's boosting you, feel like it's relieving you of that stress, of that sexual tension. But then is it just because you expect that to happen and then you tell yourself, okay, now I can stop searching, I just masturbated. Okay, now I can stop thinking about sex because I just masturbated. Is it that's happening, or is it because really masturbation, no matter what, every time you masturbate, it relieves stress on a chemical level, it relieves your sexual desires? Because when we really think about it, you can masturbate and still think about sex afterwards. You can masturbate and still feel very stressed out afterwards. But the thing that happens, and what we need to realize, is that you have a mind. With your mind, your thoughts, it's very easy to tell yourself without doing anything, if you find good reasons, obviously, and if you decide to do that, to say, okay, now I'm gonna stop thinking about sex for this reason. Okay, now I'm gonna stop thinking about this stressful situation for this reason. And as a byproduct of deciding to stop thinking about those things, guess what? You're not gonna feel the desire for sex because you're not thinking about it. You're not gonna feel the same desire for intimacy because you're not thinking about it. You're not gonna feel stressed because you're not thinking about the stressful situation. And so my question is masturbation really good for you? Is masturbation actually relieving your stress, actually making you more healthy? Because even the idea of use it or lose it comes from Master and Johnson's, that if you don't use your genitals, if you don't stimulate them, you're not going to be able to use them anymore. You're not going to be aroused anymore. Your genitals' health will just deteriorate. Now, let's go on the flip side. Masturbation doesn't kill you also, but it doesn't benefit you. Why do I say it doesn't kill you? Sure, throughout history, doctors, experts, and so on have claimed that masturbation will literally kill someone. Well, maybe not kill right away, but spiritually, emotionally, and so on. We can make the case today for the argument that spiritually it can actually affect someone because of the fact that it is a sin, but I'm not here to talk about this topic specifically today. But a lot of people actually destroy themselves and make it hard on themselves to quit because of what? Because of their reaction. The reaction that you have after you masturbate will determine a lot. If you go and think, I masturbated, therefore I am a loser, therefore I don't have any more energy because this semen is my life force, this is how I reproduce, and this is your belief, and you think that suddenly for the next few days you're not going to be able to get any work done, your mood is going to be very down because maybe of the prolactin and so on, and that you're not going to be able to be successful in any realm, and therefore you're not even going to try in the first place. Well, guess what happens? Masturbation is going to have a negative impact on you, not because of masturbation itself and the release of semen, but because of your own reaction to it. And to add to prolactin, funnily enough, after sex, prolactin levels is 400 times higher than masturbation. And we see that, okay, with the release of semen, we can of course make a scientific argument, we can make a spiritual argument, we can make a logical argument that intercourse itself is better than masturbation when it comes to the release, because you're exchanging with a real human being and there's a chemical reaction that comes into it and so on that might remove those negative side effects, as people would say, come with masturbation. And the logical argument of you're alone when you masturbate, and whilst you're with a woman, well, at least you can reproduce and do all of those things. We still need to realize that prolactin levels are 400 times higher after masturbation. Now, it's not to say that masturbation is good. It's not to say that masturbation is something that people can do once in a while. I advocate for the position that masturbation is something that people can stop doing and never engage in, but that's up to you. It's not up to me. I'm just here to present the information so that you can go ahead and see masturbation maybe differently and then decide if you want to stop doing it or if you want to reduce it and so on. Now, one of the number one argument for why we don't really need to masturbate, which is something I've talked about in previous videos many times, is simply the fact that we have a natural self-cleansing mechanism. What does that mean? We have what we call, first and foremost, wet dreams, natural emissions, where you will have, in layman's term, a release. So it's like the body takes care of itself when you do not indulge in any types of sexual activities, whether that be masturbation or sex itself. And we also have phagocytosis, which is where the old or unused sperm cells are essentially broken down and then can be reused. We have like a recycling system within us, which shows that the release is not really necessary and is not forced upon you the same way you need to go to the toilet, the same way you need to sleep, for example. So these are things that, yes, we want. I'm not saying we don't want to release with, for example, a real woman. I'm saying that it is not forced upon us. Someone can choose to abstain for all of his life. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that it is a possibility if they desire to do so. But of course, we have an innate predisposition to want to be with the opposite sex and reproduce. But this is a predisposition, not a survival need, the same way that food or water is necessary for survival. But it is still very, very valuable. But there is the claim, which has been contested, but I find still very interesting, is that after about 14 days of abstinence, the sperm cells will actually find their own way out via the urine. And the claim is that young men produce on average 1,500 sperm cells per second. But again, this is contested and people say that this is not the case. But anyways, you have the natural emissions as well as phagocytosis, the recycling system that is there for you to take care of the release itself, so you don't even have to worry about it technically. What I find also interesting is in 1963, we have 62% of men masturbating, and then over a decade later, in 1979, it went to 74%. So we have an 11% increase over the span of a few years, which correlates with the sexual revolution. So it shows that people used to masturbate much less back then than we do now. And there's different surveys that shows that men masturbate even when in relationships where, again, they partake in intimacy. So is it that they're doing it for intimacy because they really need it, or is it because to really satisfy themselves sexual, or do they do it for other reasons, such as maybe pleasure or maybe for any other reasons? Now, I'll make the case for the argument that the reason why people find masturbation so pleasurable or something that they really look forward to is for emotional needs. What do I mean by that? When we masturbate, whether it be with porn or without porn, what is actually happening in your mind is the question you need to ask yourself. You'll realize that most oftentimes, if you were to really just reflect back on that, you'll see that you are fantasizing about something that you want to do when it comes to intimacy in real life that would give you certain feelings and emotions that you're seeking in that moment. So for example, if let's say someone has been bullied all of his life and he's like, I really want to sleep with women so I can show that I'm now the boss, I'm now like the man, I can be with these beautiful women that my bullies wish they could be with, and he wants to show off that way and have that pride. Well, if that's what he really desires, then maybe for him to masturbate allows him to feel as if this is happening, even though it is not happening in real life, but only in his mind. But then if you practice with your mind well enough, visualizing something feels like you're actually experiencing that thing. You're not actually experiencing it, you're thinking about it, but it feels the same way. Like you have these emotions that you start feeling. If you start thinking about something that really scares you, well, you're going to feel fear. If you think about something that makes you happy, you're going to feel happy. If you think about something that motivates you, let's say, for example, you really want to have a kid and you start visualizing a scenario where your wife is pregnant, and then it might make you feel motivated just having this thought in the back of your mind. Just having this thought where you're just focused on. And we need to realize that our mind can only think of one thought at a time. So when we masturbate, is it really the physical sensations that feel so pleasurable? I'm not saying that they don't feel pleasurable. They do for most people. I'm saying, is it that we masturbate because of the physical stimulation that we get on the genitals and the stimulation that we get from the release in of itself? Or is it more this whole story, this whole narrative that we play in our mind whilst we're masturbating, that we spend time in? Like when we masturbate, most often time, why do people want to spend as much time as possible edging and so on? We don't really, especially with porn, we don't do it just like in 1 minute. We try to do it for at least 5 minutes and more. It's because we get, and this is another argument, we think that the only way, maybe for us, maybe we have this limiting belief that no woman really likes us and we have no possible opportunities or possibilities to go and have intimacy with a woman that would accept us to perform these types of fantasies, or at least even have intimacy with them in the first place. So we think, well, that's my only option. Most people want a sexual experience, except if you're asexual and so on, but that's very rare cases. So if everyone wants sexual experiences and want things that you cannot get them, wouldn't it be normal that if he thinks, well, masturbation is like a lesser of a sexual experience, well, it's still a sexual experience. Therefore, if it's the only one I have, well, that's what I'll do if I really need a sexual experience. Because naturally, and this is my personal opinion, this is not a popular opinion, but when you don't masturbate and you think that you can get intimacy if you do the work to be with a real woman, well, what's going to happen is you're just going to do what's necessary until you get to intimacy. You're always going to have like this motivation because you have this innate predisposition to want to be with the opposite sex. So you'll do whatever it takes, not saying that you'll do something illegal or so on, but you'll do as much as possible until you reach that goal or you get in a position where you can reproduce. So that's a benefit in itself when you stop masturbating, because now you're just forced to get the real sexual experience. And trust me, humans, the moment that they have something they really, really want to satisfy, really, really need to do, they will go and adapt to that, and they will find ways, solutions so that they can really satisfy that. So at the core, humans desire real intimacy, not masturbation. I would argue that masturbation can be pleasurable inherently, but it is not something that people seek to do every single day naturally. It is something that people might, sure, find out by rubbing their bed and so on. I'm not saying that this won't happen. What I'm saying is we have the ability to completely stop it if we want to. It is not because something is pleasurable by nature that we are forced to do it. It doesn't make sense, because why is it that some people love eating healthy whilst other people hate eating healthy and will just eat junk food? Why is it that some people find the video games pleasurable? Sure, but then they don't really play anymore. Why is it that some people will find something pleasurable early on in their lives, like a cartoon, but then they start finding things that are boring to most people more pleasurable, like reading books? So we see that it's not because something is pleasurable that by nature we are forced to act upon it. This is a limiting belief that a lot of people have, and they think, well, I just do things because of dopamine and pleasure, because I'm wired that way, rather than being honest with the reasons why they want to do that behavior in the first place. Now, a huge issue that people have is their thoughts. So let's say, for example, you decide to quit masturbation and you decide to stop that behavior. You might have thoughts of coming back to it. Now, how you're going to interpret those thoughts is going to change everything. When people go and try to abstain from something, of course, like if you've been doing a behavior for a certain number of years, maybe for all of your life almost, well, you're probably going to think of coming back to it whenever, for example, let's say you feel stress and you used to masturbate for stress relief. Well, you're probably going to think of masturbation as the first solution, because that's what you've been practicing all of these years. And maybe that's the only solution you can think of when it comes to relieving stress immediately. Because maybe in your mind, you don't know that you can watch a YouTube video and relieve the stress, or you can talk to your friend. You haven't maybe done those things yet, or maybe you haven't practiced them enough in order to really see that they can relieve the stress. But Marius Romm did a very interesting study when it comes to thoughts that I really want to go over. So in that study in 1989, they compared psychiatric patients. Now, I know you might be like, why are you talking about psychiatry? But hear me out. They compared psychiatric patients with healthy patients that had hallucinations, that heard voices. And they saw that both of these groups, the healthy patients and the psychiatric patients, had pretty much similar voices. Like they had like these hallucinations. But for one group, they went to psychiatry and became patients because they wanted to be treated, and they had a negative impact on their lives. Whilst for the other group, they were just living normal lives whilst having those hallucinations, whilst hearing those voices, and it did not have a negative impact in their lives. They acted like a normal citizen. And they saw that the number one thing that differentiated the results when it came to the negative impact that they had on their lives was simply how they interpreted those thoughts. Those that were healthy, non-patients, that didn't go to psychiatry, that didn't need treatment, simply thought that these thoughts were not as powerful as them, that these are just thoughts and they have power over them. Whilst the psychiatric patients almost saw these thoughts as omnipotent, like powerful voices that they had no control over, that were overpowering them. And a lot of people actually do that when it comes to masturbation. They see these thoughts that they have that comes from themselves as thoughts that will at one point just attack them so much until they go and masturbate. So they interpret these thoughts like that, whilst other people can just I have the same exact desire to masturbate and just interpret it as, oh yeah, I want to masturbate for this reason, but it doesn't mean I need to do it. It's really that simple. And this is very sad when it comes to masturbation, because then people create that self-fulfilling prophecy, that placebo, that, oh no, I'm losing control. I need to masturbate now. I'm going to masturbate by the end of the day. Like the sexual tension is too much. When in reality, it's just them creating that placebo in themselves. And even there's something called ego fatigue, meaning that if you constantly try to suppress something, like fight it off and be like, no, I don't want to think about these thoughts, and you try to just like completely remove them, well, at one point, you're going to basically give in. As they say, these thoughts are not supposed to be fought. The same way I might think of eating a donut right now, but I don't think, oh, the desire to eat a donut is going to compel me beyond my own will, and I'm not going to be the one choosing to eat the donut. It's going to be my body. No, I don't think that way. I don't think it's my brain deciding for me. These thoughts, they come from me. I decide to act upon them or not. They do not have power over me. That simple belief will change so much. To think that your thoughts have power over you, because that will just create a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you'll think anytime you have these thoughts that suddenly you're going to start to feel that fear, and you're going to get emotional, and you're going to be like, oh no, I'm going to relapse again, and then at one point you're going to be like, oh no, I'm losing control, and then you tell yourself, oh, I masturbated again, but that's because I lost control. Then you start blaming the urges and the temptations and the triggers rather than your own self. Not to say that you should feel shame about that, just to say that you have control about that. But another thing I want to add is like these thoughts, like these desires, people act on their desires in different ways, meaning that you can choose however you want to act when it comes to the innate predisposition to want intimacy, to be with the opposite sex. Some people will go for, let me give you examples. For some people, it's marriage. They'll go and be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go and try to get married so I can then satisfy that innate desire. For other people, it's going to the nightclub. Okay, they think, okay, these women, I can sleep with them and I'll be able to satisfy my desire. Whilst maybe the guy, when it comes to marriage, doesn't think he can satisfy it that way. He thinks that's the wrong way, essentially. So you see, it's belief-based. Another guy, he might be, for example, homosexual. So in his mind, he thinks, well, in order for me to satisfy that innate desire, I need to find another man I can have intimacy with. Another person might think, well, I need to PMO, I need to watch porn, masturbate, and have an orgasm to satisfy that. Another guy might think, I will just be masturbation alone. You have the ability to decide, how do you want to use that desire? How do you want to go about the desire? Is it you're going to be married? Is it you're going to have multiple partners? Is it you're going to go to the nightclub tonight and just find a woman? Is it that you're going to go and just watch porn and masturbate? Because the guy that wants to be married might think, I'll never ever go to the nightclub. Maybe I'll masturbate once in a while. The guy that masturbates thinks, I'll never be married, maybe. The guy that is homosexual thinks, well, I need to find men that want to do that, and doesn't consider the option of going to marriages or nightclubs, because in his mind, maybe that's not an option. I don't know. So just based on the belief, someone will decide to take a different set of action in order to satisfy that desire. I would argue that obviously marriage will be the most beneficial one for spiritual reasons, as well as it naturally means that you'll need responsibilities and grow up, and you'll need to grow and evolve as a man in order to satisfy your desire that way, which is extremely beneficial. Now, the question of relief, because we often think that releasing semen will relieve you. Of course, we brought the argument of the natural self-cleansing mechanism, which is pretty well known now. But does masturbation really relieve you? So a question I ask people all of the time is, why is it that for you, maybe it takes a week before you want to release again? Another person, it's a month. Another person, it's 90 days. Another person, it's 24 hours. Another person, it's 12 hours. Is it because of psychological reasons or physiological ones? This is when you realize, why is it that some people, for them, it's after 90 days that they really want to do it, and it's like they need that release. Whilst for other people, it's like 10 days. For other people, it's 24 hours. For other people, it's a few hours. This is when we realize, okay, if we say food, for example, of course, like it depends on the type of food that you eat. But when it comes to relieving our hunger, sure, you can, for example, practice fasting. Therefore, you're not going to be as hungry as someone that eats every single hour of the day. And you can choose to eat every 2 hours of the day, just like someone can technically choose to masturbate every 2 hours. But then there's like a limit when it comes to food. You cannot go past a certain number of weeks without food, because you might die. Because you're probably going to die at one point. And so your body will crave food and certain nutrients. But then we don't have that equivalent when it comes to a relief, a sexual release. There's no number of days. Meaning someone can go a full year and do it like every year. Another person might do it once a week. Another person might do it never. And that's when we realize, okay, so there's no like specific set number of days that we cannot go past that. And it's not to say that you should be doing semen retention for the rest of your life. If that's what you desire, it is possible, but I'm not here to say that you should do that. But anyways, as we know, the body will take care of the release. It will do the release on its own. So that's when we realize, okay, so do we really need a relief through masturbation? I would argue the best way to go about this is, look, I'm not going to masturbate because it serves as a distraction. You really want to look at what you can gain from abstaining from masturbation because it allows you to really see that it's going to be beneficial to you. So is it really about you need to get a release after this number of days? But then if that's the case, why is it that someone else is different? You might think, oh, it's because of testosterone or desires. For example, there was a research that showed that people that are more obese tend to masturbate more. There's a strong correlation with that. Technically, they will have less testosterone, yet they masturbate more than people that are more thin and healthy. So we see that oftentimes it's all about the mind, your beliefs, and how much do you value masturbation rather than needing to masturbate. And the last point I want to make is the point of dopamine, which always gets thrown around when it comes to why people want to masturbate or why they want to get that release, that orgasm. We think that when we orgasm, it's going to be like a flood of dopamine, but we don't even realize that dopamine is simply released in the anticipation of getting a reward. Dopamine is about wanting, not liking. This is very important to understand. The dopamine is released the moment, for example, the guy that wants drugs and he calls his dealer to ask for drugs. That's when dopamine is released because dopamine serves as like the vehicle. It motivates you to go and get that reward. If you are starving and you don't have food, and suddenly you see food in the near distance, you're going to release dopamine in the anticipation of getting that food because that's going to give you the reward of survival, of satisfying your hunger and maybe feeding your tribe. To give you a good modern day example, when you order food, for example, you'll have like this rush of dopamine, like you're anticipating that food coming to your door. But the moment you take a bite, you don't really care anymore. Because yes, the food might taste good and so on, but the anticipation was pretty much better than that. Really, dopamine serves as motivating you, or you're about to put that food in your mouth when you open up that box. The moment you have the thing, you don't have to think about it anymore. So when we say, oh, we orgasm because of dopamine, sure, you can say pleasure, which is not the same as dopamine, but then if it's just about pleasure, then why is it that there's so many things that we find pleasurable that we either stop or never do? Like certain junk food, like certain video games and so on that people claim to be very addictive and full of dopamine. So this is it for the video, guys. If you want to watch part 1, go and click on this video right here and I'll see you guys soon.